Shalom from Israel to all of the Daystar viewers around the world. I'm Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer and founder of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible when David said in Psalm 25:5, "Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." And God says in Zechariah 8:16, "These are the things that you shall do. Speak out the truth to one another. Judge with truth and judgment to peace in your gates. And always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner.
In our top story, Islamic extremists are massing along the Syrian border with Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was briefed by the IDF's top brass on the security threat as he surveyed the border from an Army command center on Mount Avital last week. Upon his return to Jerusalem, he told the Israeli cabinet of the large number of Islamists and Salafists that have gathered on the Syrian side of the border. Netanyahu vowed to build a fortified security fence to protect Israel from the Islamic extremists. Syria's chemical weapons program also poses a grave threat to Israel as the situation in Syria becomes increasingly volatile.
The Pentagon has published a report detailing Iran's surveillance of Israel from Syria. Written by the United States Department of Defense, the document describes the Islamic Republic's use of signals intelligence stations on the Syrian border with Israel and states that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is known to be operating on the ground in Syria, established signet listening stations in the Golan Heights. The information was then fed to Hezbollah, Iran's satellite army which operates in Lebanon. The malicious terrorist organization refuses to recognize the existence of the Jewish state and has pledged to use armed resistance in the form of terrorism against Israelis.
Police in Spain have released the details of the arrest of two men who were attempting to smuggle nuclear equipment to Iran. The suspects were employees of a company known for conspiring to conceal and export materials to the hardline Islamic Republic. A statement from the Interior Ministry in Madrid said Spanish police dismantled a ring that was trafficking material for the development of the Iranian nuclear program. Authorities investigating the Fluval company said the firm had registered in the Basque area of northern Spain using false companies in the United Arab Emirates for the deliveries, and they channeled cash through banks in other countries. The statement from the Interior Ministry went on to say that Fluval has commercial ties to Iranian firms, which the European Union listed as having clear connections to Iran's nuclear program.
The KLM and Austrian Airlines have announced that they will halt commercial flights to Tehran as part of the crippling sanctions against Iran's economic infrastructure for non-compliance on curbing its nuclear development program. Now that Iranians lack the ability to purchase tickets, the demand has drastically decreased. Until last week, both companies maintained flights to Tehran 4 times a week, but now both carriers have chosen to suspend all flights indefinitely.
The New York Times reported that weapons and ammunition used in the numerous civil wars which have plagued Africa were provided by Iran. A 6-year study conducted by a British arms trafficking researcher revealed that weapons used in the genocide in Darfur, as well as the Ivory Coast, South Sudan, Kenya, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Uganda, were manufactured in Iran. The report said that Iranian-made ammunition was distributed through secret networks to a long list of combatants, including regions under United Nations arms embargoes.
A group of 250 Palestinian activists made headlines last week when they illegally erected a tent city on a hilltop in the E1 area, the barren land located between Jerusalem and the settlement of Ma'ale Adumim. The protesters established the squatters' camp in hope of quashing Israel's recently announced plans to build residential properties in the area. After the High Court in Jerusalem ruled that the presence of the Palestinian protesters was unlawful, they were removed by security forces with no injuries. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu briefed his cabinet on the eviction, saying that harm to the contiguity between Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim will not be permitted.
The European Union is working on a new peace plan for Israel. The British foreign minister is working feverishly with his French counterpart to help jumpstart negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. According to diplomatic sources, the ministers are planning to present their peace proposal in March after the Israeli elections. Experts speculate that a major point of the plan will call on Israel to halt all construction in Judea and Samaria. There is also a possibility that the European Union will adopt the plan and internationalize it, further pressuring Israel to comply. One Israeli official said they are drafting a document which will present the principles of the future peace accord, putting it on the table as a challenge. It is likely the Palestinians will accept it and that Jerusalem will have some difficulty with it, forcing Israel into a corner.
More than 50 of the United Nations member states have officially requested that Syria be referred to the International Criminal Court at The Hague to pave the path for future war crimes proceedings. According to a letter signed by the countries, systematic execution, torture, and rape have been rampant since the beginning of the Syrian civil war in March of 2011. The United Nations Human Rights Office released a statement now estimating that at least 60,000 people have been killed during the uprising against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
Lebanon's Daily Star newspaper has quoted a Hamas official as saying that 885 Palestinians have been killed in the fighting in Syria. The United Nations Human Rights Council appealed to Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to take in Palestinians fleeing the violence in Syria. Both parties rebuffed the request, leaving more than 150,000 people to freeze and starve. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh rejected the request on ideological grounds, saying that the acceptance of these refugees would undermine the Palestinians' right of return. Israel has repeatedly offered aid to the Syrian people by way of the International Red Cross. The offer has been rejected numerous times.
A federal judge in Washington, D.C. has ruled that documents incriminating the Palestinian Authority for terrorism are inadmissible and must be returned to the PA or destroyed. Parents of 2 American teenagers murdered in a 2002 suicide bombing are suing the Palestinian Authority for $300 million. Prosecutors apparently hope to use a memo detailing the PA's involvement in the planning and execution of the terror attack after that memo was inadvertently given to them during a deposition in September. Judge Richard Leone declared, however, that that document is privileged and protected information. Lawyers for the prosecution released a statement saying that the loss of the document will deprive Congress of the kind of evidence that it must have to evaluate whether to continue funding the PA, only to see that money to be used for the support and to reward terrorism against Americans.
The State of Israel is moving forward with renovation projects at some of the major sites in the Holy Land, despite objections from the PA. Israel has decided to invest millions of shekels in refurbishing national heritage sites, including the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron, Herod's Fortress at Herodion, and Tel Shiloh, where Jewish tradition holds that the tabernacle once stood. Pilgrims of all faiths come from around the world to visit these sites, and Israel plans to make them handicap accessible and update their safety features. Palestinians object to the renovation projects, claiming the sites belong to them and not to Israel. A spokesman for the PA called on the international community to condemn the proposed renovations. Israeli Cabinet Secretary Tzvi Hauser said many sites mentioned in the Bible took place in Judea and Samaria. It is our national and human moral obligation to take care and preserve these sites.
The Israeli Water Authority is reporting that 6 days of heavy rain and snowfall last week have helped the Sea of Galilee to rise nearly 1 full meter. Known in Hebrew as the Kinneret, the body of water is Israel's largest source of fresh water, and the increase is being received as an enormous blessing. Since the beginning of winter, the sea has risen by 2 meters, amounting to the highest recorded level since 2007. Water Authority employees estimate that melting snow will pump an additional 50 centimeters over the coming days, and that the rainfall in January alone has accounted for 2/3 of the sea's annual average. And that concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here on a beautiful day in Jerusalem on our rooftop studio. My guest today is Gil Hoffman, political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. Gil, thank you for being on the show.
Pleasure.
Gil, with the elections only days away, people are very excited to see what the outcome's going to be. What do you think is going to be the makeup of the next government?
Well, Netanyahu is going to win the election. That's a foregone conclusion. But what really matters in an Israeli coalition government system is what parties he invites to join him. It's looking like he'll have a mix. He'll have parties on the right that are religious parties, and he'll have also parties that are secular parties that are more dovish, that want to present a moderate image of Israel to the world.
The makeup of the government, how does that affect international policy vis-a-vis the world when it comes to Israel?
Well, the world wants to know that Israel is not going to be what stands in the way from there being peace in the Middle East. And Netanyahu will make sure that the world won't have any reason to think that. He'll build a government that represents a consensus of Israelis from left to right who can defend Israel when it comes to security, but also be willing to make compromises for peace in the Middle East.
This has been a very interesting election period. There was a defensive war in Gaza. There's been the presidential elections in America. What are the main issues of this election?
Well, as any election in Israel, peace and security plays a very important role, but also matters of religion and state, what it means to be a Jewish state and a democratic state at the same time. And just like your elections in America, the economy, when it all comes down to it, makes people vote one way or another.
You know, one of the main storylines of this election is the rise of a party called the Jewish Home, which is more of a hawkish party, a party of people who are more founded on Judeo-Christian values. How does the growth of this party affect the coalition government after the elections?
Well, Josh, I'm not positive that Netanyahu is going to want to build a government with that party. That party's leader is someone who Netanyahu has had disputes with in the past, Naftali Bennett. He's an American high-tech millionaire who's very impressive, and Netanyahu doesn't want to build possible competition, and he wants to look good to the world. So maybe he'll include him at a lower cost than Naftali would normally be willing to pay, but maybe Netanyahu might purposely leave him out.
Another new party is a party called Yesh Atid, which is calling for all members of society in Israel to serve the army, get in the workforce. How is that issue affecting this election?
Josh, if there's any party that's going to be part of Netanyahu's government, guaranteed, it's Yesh Atid, a party led by a very charismatic former anchorman on the news who's moderate, who Israelis like personally, who's easy to get along with, and his main issue is making the burden of service in this country equal to all. He wants ultra-Orthodox to serve, Arabs to serve, everyone to serve our country. And he's willing to find compromises to make that happen gradually over time. And I think that he can work with the ultra-Orthodox on that in a way that can make everybody happy. It won't be easy, it'll be a big challenge, but I think it can be done.
Well, on the other side of the spectrum is Shas Party, the ultra-Orthodox party that says we want to learn Torah instead of serving in the army, and it's the traditional ally of Likud. Do you think there's a possibility that Likud would choose Yair Lapid over the Shas Party?
Josh, politics is the art of compromise, especially in Israel. On the issue of war and peace, on the Palestinian issue, it's very hard for the Israeli right and left to join together in a government. But on the issue of improving the lives of the ultra-Orthodox and how to do it, their compromises can be reached. Not only is Yair Lapid, the head of Yesh Atid, someone who can work on compromises, so is the new leader of Shas. Aryeh Deri, their former leader who's come back, is someone who wants desperately to improve poverty, improve the lot of the ultra-Orthodox who are too poor. He wants to work on poverty. And the way to do that is by making compromises on the ultra-Orthodox issue.
You know, a lot of people say in this election that the results is a foregone conclusion. What do you think some of the surprises might be in a couple days from now?
I think that Netanyahu is going to win the election by a landslide, probably get twice as many votes as any other party. I think we're going to see Tzipi Livni, the former foreign minister who came back with great fanfare, absolutely destroyed by this election. The Kadima party that she tried to destroy, she lost its leadership race and then formed a party to compete against itself, might get almost as many votes as her party does. And I think that will be a big blow for her.
Well, Gil, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Josh, what I want the people in America and around the world to know is that the people of Israel want peace, and they're going to get a government that will do its part to preserve as much as possible of the land that God gave to them, while making compromises to move the peace process forward with their neighbors in this very difficult region that we live in. I talk about this all around the world. I've got speaking tours coming up in Belgium, throughout the United States, and in England. And you can reach me at Gil_Hoffman on Twitter and Gil@jpost.com if you're interested in me speaking in your community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gil, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. If you're watching this in Israel, go out and vote. Now back to the studio.
Shalom from Jerusalem. My name's David Bin. We all know that famous verse in the Bible, God blesses those who bless Israel. But did you ever stop and think about what is the greatest thing I can bless Israel with? Obviously, the greatest thing in life isn't a new car or even a new house. The greatest thing in life is children. Yes, God blesses those who bless Israel. And yes, the greatest thing you can give Israel is more children. Find out how you can save a life in Israel and bring more children to Israel. Visit friendsofefrat.org and help save a life of a child in Israel.
Up next, Shining Light from Israel.
Here amongst his battalion, nothing stands out about Lewis Miller. He's one of hundreds of paratroopers that today will be marching to Jerusalem before graduating into active duty. But a closer look reveals that his story is one of the many stories that form together to make the IDF such a rich and diverse military. Because Lewis Miller wasn't required to serve in the IDF, rather, he chose to. And he came all the way from Alabama to be here.
Lewis.
4 years earlier, Lewis Miller was just another all-American teenager. Having been raised in Alabama before attending college at Indiana University, his life seemed to follow the same trajectory as the millions of other college students in America. But that all changed after he experienced a life-altering trip to Israel through the Birthright program, which provides free trips to young Jewish adults who have never visited Israel. Like so many others, Lewis was touched on a deeply personal level by Israel's story of struggle against all odds for an independent Jewish state. And that's when he decided to move to Israel and joined the IDF. Now, years later, Lewis is a soldier in the IDF, and after months of intensive training, he is about to embark on a 55-kilometer march as part of his final test as a paratrooper. The march begins at sundown when the soldiers set off.
This has been 4.5 years in the making, actually. Ever since I did Birthright in the winter of '07, I just kind of got this into my head. This is what I wanted to do, and it took a long time to get here. It took a little while, but I'm here, and like this is a huge milestone.
Along the route, there are 4 rest stops that serve to rejuvenate the soldiers and allow them something to eat before moving on.
That went by pretty slowly, but it's been tough. I'm not gonna say it hasn't. It's not as easy as I thought this one was gonna be, to be honest. I'm having a bit of a My feet are killing me. I'll just say that. I don't know, everything's pretty good though. Other than that, can't really complain too much. Everyone's feet are hurting, everyone's back's hurting, so we're just gonna get through it, and I guess we'll get to the part with the stretcher soon enough, and that pretty much marks the end. Just gotta keep going.
As the soldiers rear the hills of Jerusalem and enter the city streets, they experience an emotional moment as parents gather to see their children become men. In the final few kilometers, parents seek out their children and are allowed a brief moment to embrace before finally carrying on to the finish line. Later that day, the award ceremony begins, and Lewis Miller is on the lookout for his parents, who flew in from the United States just for this occasion. He hasn't seen them in nearly a year and doesn't know what to expect. But what he could never have expected is the surprise he feels when his name is called out, and he is distinguished with an award in excellence for his performance during the last 6 months of training. Lewis didn't just succeed, he excelled.
Please stay tuned for the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Welcome to this new episode of ICEJ Report. I just want to share with you a few thoughts about exciting things what God is doing in our world today. I was intrigued over the last couple of weeks when I was looking about the incredible numbers of people getting saved and finding Jesus in the southern hemisphere of our planet. In the global south, in the southern region of our world, Christianity is growing at an unprecedented measure. If you just look to the continent of Africa, in 1917 there were some 140 million believers there, and 4 decades later, 2010, already this number grew to 490 million believers. 500 million Christians just in Africa. If this growth continues over the next decades, we will see soon more than 1 billion believers just in Africa. Very similar developments are taking place in Latin America and also in Southeast Asia. God is moving powerfully today. Major revivals are taking place in China, in India, and in many other places, in particular in the southern part of our world today. I know you might ask yourself, why don't I see this similar revival and the same spirit moving in the places where I am living, in particular if you come from Western countries? And I want to challenge you with the Word of God, what Jesus told his disciples when he said in John chapter 4, verse 35, "Do you not say there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold," Jesus say, "I say to you, lift up your eyes and look to the fields, for they are already white for harvest." And I want to challenge you today, if you look at Christianity, don't be depressed, but see that we are living indeed in a time of harvest. God is moving powerfully in the world, and he wants you to be part of what he is doing. Just a few days ago, I was in the President's Palace for his annual reception for Christian leaders here in the Holy Land. President Shimon Peres said something very astonishing. He said, never before in the history of the Jewish people were Jewish-Christian relations better than they are today. And this is an astonishing statement. Just look at the tragic history of Jewish-Christian relations, on the atrocities, on the pogroms, on even the Holocaust which took place just 70 years ago. And to say today, 70 years after Auschwitz, those relations are at a historic high, that is nothing short than a miracle. And indeed, if you look to the church today, to those centers of revivals, in particular in the south of our world, you will see that when people come to faith in Jesus, when they are inspired by the Holy Spirit, they all share a love and a passion for the nation of Israel. As a matter of fact, the state of Israel today recognizes evangelical Christians all over the world as the key strategic partner for the future. And there are many projects which Christians are undertaking today where Israel sees that they are not alone. Just during the last Gaza war, it were Christians which were the first, which were down in places like Sderot, which were under constant fire. We just built in Haifa a home for Holocaust survivors, and the municipality of Haifa even decided to rename the street into the International Christian Embassy Street in Haifa. This is historic. It shows you that our relationship with the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, they have reached a new level. And I want to invite you to become part of this exciting world. Our work reaches out to every segment of society because we want to change the relations between Christians and Jews in our days. I'm Jürgen Böhler, the Executive Director of the Christian Embassy, and I want to invite you to become part of the exciting things what God wants to do in this coming year. We see exciting developments taking place, and I want you to become part of them. I want to invite you to become a partner of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem. We are your embassy here in Jerusalem. Please contact us at our website www.icej.org or send us an email at info@icej.org. We would love to hear from you and partner with you together in this coming year to bring a major blessing to the nation of Israel. May the Lord bless you out of Zion.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El Rome.
And I'm Erin Viner reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all your Israel updates.